This event today is part of Steve Blank's actually week-long visit to Finland. Steve has been meeting leading decision makers, opinion leaders and startup entrepreneurs in the Helsinki region. And his aim has been to better understand the opportunities and challenges of the Finnish innovation ecosystem. My name is Pekka Lundmark and I have the pleasure to be the moderator of this event. And when I do not moderate this type of events, my main job is to run the leading material handling company, Konecranes. This week is being documented real time at the website steveblank.fi, and there, if you go there, you will find online streaming, daily blogs, pictures and videos, as well as the full program of the week. And then based on the discussions this week, there will be a manifesto compiled, and that will be a manifesto of what needs to be done to make Helsinki into a leading startup hub of Europe. That is an ambitious target, and the target is that that hub would gather together the best talent and capital from surrounding regions. This panel discussion takes place at a pretty interesting time. We all know that we had a deep recession in 2008, 2009, then after that a fairly quick recovery, and right now, or I would say partial recovery when we look at industrial production and export from Finland, it is roughly somewhere between, in the middle between the top year 2008 and the bottom 2009, 2010. We have recovered about 50% in terms of our industrial activity and export from the bottom of the recession. But now the question, which nobody really has an answer to right now, is that where are we going to be heading from here? We also know that about 50% of all the taxes collected in Finland, which is then used to of course, funding the public sector and all the services, about 50% of the taxes come from the export industry. And we have a pretty heavy debate right now in Finland going on when it comes to the government program and and the pros and cons in the program when it comes to creating incentives for large companies to invest, export companies to invest, but not only that, but also for the startups to get growth going and to attract investment, venture capital included into these startups. So this is a very good time for this meeting and this panel discussion today. And the way we will run this is that Steve Blank will start with the presentation, and then after that I will invite the panelists onto the floor. Who is then Steve Blank? Steve is a serial entrepreneur. He has founded 8 startup companies in Silicon Valley. His last company, Epiphany, was listed on stock exchange in 1999 for approximately $2 billion. After the IPO, Steve created a customer development model to better understand the patterns of building successful startups. He has written, for example, a book, The 4 Steps to the Epiphany, which became a best-selling technology entrepreneurship Bible and revolutionized the way startups are built. Currently, Steve is Professor of Technology Venturing at Stanford University, and his new course called Lean Launchpad teaches aspiring entrepreneurs his method of creating startups. Steve's ambition is to renew entrepreneurial ecosystems and education all around the world. Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce Steve Blank.
So, thank you very much. Given how well this presentation goes, I might be your quickest export at the end of this evening, whether I managed to insult too many people at the same time. Some of you might have seen part of this presentation if you've attended some others I gave and I will assure you that the back half of this presentation you haven't seen before. I'm honored to be here as a guest, and I just want to emphasize as a guest, I'm not an expert on Finland, I'm not an expert on strategy, I'm just somebody who teaches entrepreneurship, who's done 8 companies in 21 years and then spent another decade teaching over 1,000 entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley, both engineering schools at Stanford, and I also teach at Berkeley and Columbia and the business schools. But I just wanted to share with you a lot of things I've now seen about Finland and entrepreneurship, and just take it as the view from an outsider. Number one is the words corporate life cycle, innovation, startups, founders, and ecosystems come up a lot in discussion. It's come up with the business people, corporate execs I've met, it's come up with the government ministers, it's come up with everybody. It's come up obviously with entrepreneurs. And the interesting thing is, why should I care? Why should I care if it's not directly affecting me? And in fact, more specifically, why should I care about starting new companies in Finland? What should it matter? And the answer is, it should matter because old companies die. Big idea. Old companies die mostly because of things that happen outside their control. In the last several decades, the life cycles, that is the time between when a company starts and when it goes out of business, has been compressed. They've been getting shorter. And they've been getting shorter because of technology shifts. They're not about Finland or the United States, but are worldwide shifts. Technology is now available everywhere. Disruption happens. And disruption is what puts large companies out of business. What's disruption? Disruption could be new technology. It could be globalization. Gee, I can now make your product for a third the price in China. It could be new regulation or deregulation. It could be that consumer tastes have changed, or that new competition you never even saw or didn't take seriously showed up. All these things add up to disrupting large existing companies. There's another observation that I think economists worldwide are now concluding, is that job growth from existing companies, even those doing wonderfully well, will decline. The 20th century, we saw job growth from large companies getting larger. Yet all the things that are great about technology and globalization have actually conspired to make large companies more efficient. I can now outsource a good number of my workforce to other countries. Technology has made my employees more productive. All those are reasons why large companies are going to be hiring less. We believe that job growth will come from new corporations. Those new corporations are startups. So with that, I normally would finish the presentation. We're done. And you could all go home, and that was a quick 15 minutes. But I have to tell you, even in Silicon Valley, this word is not understood. And the question is, what's a startup? And let me share with you what I've learned on how to define startups. But just as an aside, I should tell you, before I do that, something I've noticed that I don't think even Finns appreciate. This should make the hair stand up on the back of your neck. Entrepreneurs are coming to Finland from the Nordic and Baltic regions because they believe this is the best place to start a company. I've run into entrepreneurs from Russia, from Sweden, from Estonia, who said Helsinki is the place to start companies. And that's an amazing observation, because entrepreneurial clusters, innovation centers, are not just employers of local people, but the true test of whether innovation is happening is whether people will leave their homes and come to somewhere else. Silicon Valley is not about employing local people. People get on airplanes from all over the world that start companies there. I just want to observe, I've seen something here that at least your business leaders haven't picked up on yet. Some of them have, but certainly on the university level they're seeing. People are coming to the Startup Sauna and other places in Helsinki to start companies from outside of Finland. Boy, I'd be standing at the immigration gates with open arms and baskets of flowers for people who want to start jobs. They're not standard immigrants. Here's a distinction. People want to come to your country because, the pay is good, fine. But there are people who want to come to the country to employ hundreds and, if possible, thousands of Finns. These are the people I'd be giving the parade into their new homes. I think this is a Helsinki Spring. It's a big idea. The idea is as follows. Just like the Arab Spring, where 20-year-olds communicate in a way that their parents have no idea about. Arab students on the street were able to communicate with each other inside the country and across all the other countries to tell each other what was happening. I have to tell you that every smart entrepreneur in Finland knows more about what's going on in Silicon Valley than their entire neighborhood that's over 30. This truly is a generation gap. Entrepreneurs are now plugged in to what's going on elsewhere. And it's leading to this revolution, which in my generation would have ended up in the street burning something. And now you have a generation, a second, who can't wait to start companies in Finland. What an enormously exciting idea. So, as I said, I don't even know what a startup is. At least I didn't when I started in Silicon Valley. I always thought a startup was what I did for my first 8 jobs. Then I started teaching and realized that different professors had different definitions of what a startup is. So I put together a taxonomy that was kind of a set of descriptions that I thought I'd share with you, and then we'll actually use that taxonomy to have an interesting discussion. I believe there are 6 types of startups. The first startup is a lifestyle startup. In California, a lifestyle startup is a surfer, somebody who loves to surf the ocean, who opens a surf shop, puts the open sign on, and makes enough money so they could put the closed sign on and go surfing for the rest of the time. Seriously. In Silicon Valley, those people would put up the I'm coding sign, and then do coding, and then put up the I'm closed sign. They are working to live their passion. They don't want to work for anybody else. They don't want to build a business. They stay in business just long enough to pay the rent and eat. But they are entrepreneurs. They are founders. There's a cadre of them in every country. I'm sure somewhere in Finland are lifestyle entrepreneurs. But the next category is kind of interesting. These are small business startups. What's a small business? A grocery store, a carpenter, an electrician, an internet consultant, a database consultant, someone who might have a little website. They don't also work for large companies, they work for themselves. And their goal is to serve known customers with known products and feed the family. They're happy if they can make a great living, keep their family, not starving to death, though I heard that's impossible to do in Finland. It is possible in the United States. Basically, a small business is looking to find a business model that's profitable. They do it with an existing team. They raise money from friends or families or bank loans or government organizations that help small businesses. And if they make $100,000 or 100,000 euros a year or a little more, they're happy. It's a great business. And they could stay as a small business forever. Just as an aside, in the United States, there are 5.7 million small businesses. They employ 50% of non-governmental workers in the U.S. The U.S. is still a nation of small businesses. So we have lifestyle businesses, we have small businesses, but now let me get to what Silicon Valley calls a startup. Even though these all had startup, they're not what we do in Silicon Valley. And they're not what I've been talking about that I've seen here in Finland. There are two types of Silicon Valley startups. One, a scalable startup. These are crazy people. Some of them in this room. They have a vision, which is probably a hallucination, but they have a vision that they're going to build something huge, big. They're going to solve for unknown customers, unknown features, and their goal is to search for a business model for a total available market that's at least 300 million euros, and they want to grow their business to 50 million euros and above a year. These are big players, big deals. Scalable startups are born to be big. And the key distinction, besides their size, is that they require risk capital. Risk capital is what makes Silicon Valley and other entrepreneurial clusters work. Risk capital are the equally insane financial people that understand 90% of the companies they fund are going to go out of business. 90%. And that the other 10% will more than pay back their investors with great profitability. Risk capital is called venture capital. It could be business angels. But it is an integral part, as we'll see later, of the ecosystem. Without risk capital, Silicon Valley would just have crazy people sitting in their garages building technology, but never have built lasting companies. And when we say startup, we mean scalable startup. Now, in the last 3 years, another class of Silicon Valley startup has emerged, and I'll just call it, for the sake of this discussion, a viable startup. A viable startup is typically one doing internet, mobile, or small-scale gaming apps. Why they're viable? Well, number one, their goal is to sell to a large company. They're happy to get sold from 3 to 30 million euros. But more importantly, there's been a rapid change in how you build internet, mobile, and gaming app companies. It used to be, a decade ago, to start a company, you had to buy computers costing millions of dollars. Whether they were mini computers or workstations, you had to buy dedicated hardware. Then you needed to buy specialized software for each one of the engineers you had. And then it might take you a year or more to ship your product. None of that is true anymore. You could start an internet, mobile, or gaming company on your laptop. The computing happens out in the cloud, on other people's computers, and you use those resources like electricity. You pay per computing cycle. You no longer need millions of dollars. You can start these for hundreds of thousands of dollars, which allows a new class of startups to exist, and also a new class of investors to exist, who no longer need to raise funds that are hundreds of millions of dollars, but actually could raise funds of tens of millions of dollars and fund these just fine. Thank you. Scalable startups and viable startups. That's the core of what Silicon Valley does. But that's not what a country does. There's still more entrepreneurship. Large companies innovate. Finland innovates. 15 years ago, a professor at Harvard named Clayton Christensen observed that large corporations do two things: sustaining innovation and disruptive innovation. Sustaining innovation is what large companies do wonderfully well. I know how to build elevators, I know how to build better elevators. I know how to build cranes, I'm going to keep innovating around that core crane business better than any company in the world. And I know I can't stand still. And so I'm going after an existing market and known customers with known features, but I know I have to keep building and partnering and acquiring and sometimes get government loans and subsidies, do whatever I need, because this is a core industry. And if I'm a smart company, I'm going to keep innovating around my core problem. But every once in a while, what happens to even the greatest company is they get smacked on the side of the head by something they never saw. And that's called disruptive innovation. As I said earlier, new technologies, new competitors, new industries, etc. It's very hard, if you're a large company CEO and executive, to keep your eye on every possible threat. And the way you deal with disruptive innovation to recover is, again, you build or you partner or you acquire. In the United States, Facebook, everybody hear about Facebook? No? All right, 50% of Facebook's employees came from Google. Facebook disrupted Google. Google owned the interface to the internet until one day they didn't. No fault of their own, somebody invented social media and social networking. They had no idea what to do. So they're out acquiring intellectual property and talent. Google is acquiring talent, companies for talent, not hiring people, but acquiring entire companies. They acquired a bunch of guys who had this crazy idea for a phone. They acquired the Android team. They did not build it inside. The Android team, actually run by Rubin, was so creative, he basically took over a part of Google, and Google's now in the phone business. Large companies do innovation, sustaining and disrupting. The last type of innovation are social entrepreneurs. And I mentioned them because they're a great part of any country's ecosystem. These are entrepreneurs who wake up in the morning and say, listen, I'd like to make my country or the world better. And they do it two ways. They might decide to build a for-profit company, but say, I don't want to focus entirely on profits. I want to focus on making products that make the world better, and if we make money, so be it. There are other types of social entrepreneurs who essentially want to create new NGOs, who say, you know, I want to make a non-profit to make the world better. So these are the 6 types of startups. Make sense so far? Why I mentioned them is a couple things. As an educator, I quickly realized that each of these startups require a different set of skills. Teaching people who want to open up a grocery store how to work like an entrepreneur doing a technology startup is a waste. Teaching people who want to do a technology startup how to run a grocery store is a waste. Not understanding that there are different skills is a major mistake, and we're fixing that now in the United States and Silicon Valley. But more importantly for Finland, each of these startups require different government policies. You cannot build an ecosystem for scalable startups at the same way you're building an ecosystem to support large corporation national champions. It's not that you need one or the other, you just need different ones. They're not competitive. Corporate innovators understand that startups are the seed corn, that if you do it well, they'll be buying these innovative companies. They're not competitive, but you need different ecosystems and strategies. My view is scalable startups will provide the highest job growth in the future for Finland. That's a debate you could have internally, that's my observation. But I think they require an ecosystem you don't have. And let me observe what that would be. First of all, it starts with the entrepreneurs. And we have some sitting in front, who to me are the perfect characteristic. They take risk. Entrepreneurs are born crazy. They hate being taken care of. They want to go out in the world and do something that's not been done before. The first step of an entrepreneur is to do this with no funding. Paying an entrepreneur to think is criminal. It's criminal. You're actually going to deaden the way they think. Even though someone might take your money, it's a mistake. They need to be building product and thinking through their business model on their credit cards and eating soup with a fork. They need to be hungry. And then when they have an idea, they need to be in an incubator with skills training, and mentoring from experienced entrepreneurs. And experienced entrepreneurs doesn't mean people who've written checks to entrepreneurs, nor does it mean people who've stood next to an entrepreneur. It means people who've actually been trying to make a payroll sometime in their life in a startup. And these incubators provide networking, connections, and they're typically done in a shared office space and give these startups small funding, not large funding, small. 30,000 euros. It's a great, let's get this going for 6 weeks. The next part in an ecosystem, oh, and by the way, it's limited time. This is not like getting the bedroom apartment in your mother's house. We want you to leave, not stay. And getting too comfortable is another fatal error. Entrepreneurs need to leave. They either need to leave because they got a better idea, or they need to leave because they failed. And I will just observe, in Finland, that word seems to be taken out of the inserted back for entrepreneurship. You could leave it out for the rest of your society, but it needs to be inserted back. No, seriously, I don't want to screw up the rest of your society. I think it's awesome. I think it's awesome. If I didn't want to be an entrepreneur, I'd be moving here. But this is the last place I would show up right now. Because you guys don't value risk and failure as an integral part of the process. This is integral. Entrepreneurship and infinite cash just is like, it doesn't work together. Well, the next piece is angel funds. Angel funds, and you now have a cadre of the beginning of a great angel organization in Finland, is now when the startup thinks it's actually a company. We think we understand who our customers are, and let's get out of the building and start searching for our business model. And in this case, it's still limited funding. Give them no more than 300,000 euros. And a ton of experienced mentoring, which includes a good number of you. Now I need some corporate mentoring. Who should I call on? Where should I go? How do we get out of Finland? What's our national, is this a European policy, or are we going to go to the United States? Because still today, a lot of Finnish entrepreneurs don't realize you don't have 100 million people hiding somewhere else in the country. Meaning the market's not large enough to support a scalable startup. So almost from the day you get funded, you need to be thinking about international markets. You don't need to be leaving, but you need to be thinking about how do you address hundreds of millions of people. And finally, the piece that's missing is venture capital. And I don't mean foreign venture capital. I mean eventually Finnish venture capital. These are people who provide large funds, large funding to startups, 2 million euros and above. It's done when the startup has found the business model and provides the fund for scale. Not because you asked for it, but you think, and everybody thinks, you're ready to scale the business to the next step. Rovio's a perfect example. It's the model for me, for venture capital. The only difference was they couldn't find the money in Finland. I believe in another decade, if you do this right, they will. And startups might require multiple rounds of money for scale. And it requires startup experience outside of Finland. My observation about the ecosystem challenges that exist today in Finland is that the current policies that you have for capital gains, I'll just mention one that I found out. Oh, we all believe in entrepreneurship. Good, the new government just raised the capital gains tax. I don't quite understand how those two work together. And again, I don't want to, the minister's smiling, so I guess he doesn't understand how it works together. But you know what, it's politics. I come from the United States also, where politics is kind of a national sport. So, investment incentives. I talked to a business angel today who was trying to raise money from large family funds to do a business angel fund in Finland. And the family funds said, listen, we're nationalistic, we love to invest in Finland, but besides startups not making any money in the last decade, are there any investment incentives at all to invest in Finnish angel funds? And the answer is no. So we're not suggesting that you have some national whatever, but just some kind of tax break for family funds who want to stick money in angels that invest in Finland. Why on earth would you not do something for job creation? And the third one is my observation about immigration. We got this wrong in the United States for the last decade. Is confusing everybody who wants to cross our border with somebody who wants to like get on welfare and suck all the money out of our system, etc. And not understanding the distinction between immigrants who want to start companies and build local jobs. They're not the same. And I know it gets cut up in all the nationalistic policies of every country now. When you get into a recession, every country wants to close the border. I would just suggest you want to close the border to everybody but the ones who want to actually employ people. Just might want to think about that. The other observation is there's a major cultural view of risk and failure here that is just a national thing of, boy, we won't admit anything. Risk is, here, let me start. Do you know what we call a failed entrepreneur in Silicon Valley? Anybody know the name? There's a special name we label them with.
Experience.
Experienced. Big idea. Failed entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley are called experienced. Try that in Finland. The culture needs to change. Startups fail 90% of the time. Now, I have to tell you, in this room, a couple people are going, well, I'd never be in that business. But when I tell that to entrepreneurs, in a room full of entrepreneurs, I go, 90% of you are going to fail. Every one of them is looking at the teams next one and going, I feel sorry for those guys. Think about it. That's the culture of entrepreneurship. It ain't going to be me. I'm the genius. That culture needs to change here. It really does, or else you will just beat innovation out of the system. This is not like corporate failure. This is not Nokia, which, by the way, my entire trip, this was the only thing that just blew me away. It took me 4 days to recognize this. Not a single person I met brought up Nokia. This entire country is so wrapped around Nokia's failure as a personal failure and as a national failure, rather than stuff that happens to great companies. And I'm just amazed. So I will bring it up. Let's all say the word, Nokia. Can we say that? Nokia, can we all just say the word? I mean, it'll make you feel better. It's like Dad did something embarrassing and we don't want to bring it up. It's not like they were the most stupid company in the world. They're on the list, but not near the top. It truly happens to everybody. You only had one of them, though, so it's embarrassing. Don't feel bad. I'm here to tell you, it's okay. But all these things kind of actively discourage scalable startups. So now let me get serious on some tactics, because this morning we were nice enough to meet with the Ministry of Employment, and these are the slides I showed them. Except for this slide, which is actually I thought of since our meeting. Here's some tactical problems. Is that government VCs, TechUs officials, and incubators are paid by salary and consultants. And consultants are paid with TechUs money. So few are willing to say, excuse me, we think the system is wrong. Why would you do that if you're getting paid on salary? I have yet to, I don't quite understand why everybody isn't being paid on equity. If you're supposed to be funding companies that succeed, why are you getting this isn't like punch a time clock. They're all on the wrong incentive system, if you even want to keep them. I think they should be like sharing the pain. The other thing I noticed is you're missing experienced startup entrepreneurs in the entire ecosystem. Again, this is where it's like, oh yes, I've been an entrepreneur, well what have you done? Oh, I was there, I was their consultant. Well, that doesn't count. At least not for me, for startup experience. Each of these steps must require risk for the entrepreneur and for the investor. And I want to emphasize the investor. Right now you have a system, at least for public funding, where there is zero risk for the investor, and I don't get it. It just doesn't, I've never seen that in my life. Public funding of private capital does not work. How many decades? I'm not running for anything. He is. You should be up here saying this stuff. Each party needs to have equal risk. What's missing here? While the entrepreneurs have the risk, you can't, or else you end up just writing dumb money checks without having any consequence of success or failure. I would be happy if they made a ton of money if the checks they wrote made great investments, but I'd be equally happy if they lost their house when they didn't. Then they decide, ooh, I might want to be in another ministry. But I actually believe the ultimate goal, and this is a big idea, I think you have a system in transition that forgot that it's in transition. I think it's stuck. That is, I think the goal should be, ultimately, to create a private capital ecosystem that's not going to happen overnight. And that what you really want to do is fund and attract experienced incubators and venture capital. Yet, in every ministry I've talked to, I'm trying to find the one public official who could have a single unified vision of what the world looks like with all these alphabet soups of ministries. Because I believe that there are great models, Israel, Singapore, etc. But they are not the ones you should copy. You have some great expertise here in Finland that you can make a Finnish version, not the Israeli version or not the Singaporean version, but a version that works for Finland that ultimately has a unified vision that says we're going to use public money as a transition to create private capital where people are equally crazy and going to get incented and take risks. And so my suggestion is find a vision, put public funding for innovation out of business. So thank you very much, and I hope you don't throw me out.